Thank you very much, everyone. Are you a citizen of the United States of America? Oh, gee, I'm sorry, I just can't answer that question, and that's after spending billions and billions of dollars. There used to be a time when you could answer questions like that very easily. There used to be a time when you could proudly declare, I am a citizen of the United States. Now they're trying to erase the very existence of a very important word and a very important thing, citizenship. They're even coming after the Pledge of Allegiance in Minnesota. I'm proud to be a citizen. You're proud to be a citizen. The only people who are not proud to be citizens are the ones who are fighting us all the way about the word citizen. Today I'm here to say we are not backing down on our effort to determine the citizenship status of the United States population. I stand before you to outline new steps my administration is taking to ensure that citizenship is counted so that we know how many citizens we have in the United States. Make sense? We will defend the right of the American people to know the full facts about the population, size of citizens and non-citizens in America. It is essential that we have a clear breakdown of the number of citizens and non-citizens that make up the U.S. populations. Imperative. Knowing this information is vital to formulating sound public policy, whether the issue is health care, education, civil rights, or immigration. We must have a reliable count of how many citizens, non-citizens, and illegal aliens are in our country. The Department of Commerce sensibly decided to include a citizenship question in the 2020 census, as has been done many, many times throughout the history of the United States. Unfortunately, this effort was delayed by meritless litigation. As shocking as it may be, far-left Democrats in our country are determined to conceal the number of illegal aliens in our midst. They probably know the number is far greater, much higher than anyone would have ever believed before. Maybe that's why they fight so hard. This is part of a broader left-wing effort to erode the rights of the American citizen and is very unfair to our country. The Supreme Court ultimately affirmed our right to ask the citizenship question, and very strongly it was affirmed. But the Supreme Court also ruled that we must provide further explanation that would have produced even more litigation and considerable time delays. The case is already in 3 federal district courts that have been, to be totally honest, extremely unfriendly to us. These delays would have prevented us from completing the census on time. It's deeply regrettable, but it will not stop us from collecting the needed information, and I think even in greater detail and more accurately. Therefore, we are pursuing a new option to ensure a complete and timely count of the non-citizen population. Today, I will be issuing an executive order to put this very plan into effect immediately. I am hereby ordering every department and agency in the federal government to provide the Department of Commerce with all requested records regarding the number of citizens and non-citizens in our country. They must furnish all legally accessible records in their possession immediately. We will utilize these vast federal databases to gain a full, complete, and accurate count of the non-citizen population, including databases maintained by the Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration. We have great knowledge in many of our agencies. We will leave no stone unturned. The Census Bureau projected that using previously available records, it could determine citizenship for 90% of our population or more. With today's executive order, which eliminates longstanding obstacles to data sharing, we're aiming to count everyone. Ultimately, this will allow us to have an even more complete count of citizens than through asking the single question alone. It will be, we think, far more accurate. The Census Bureau can use this information along with information collected through the questionnaire to create the official census. In other words, as a result of today's executive order, we will be able to ensure the 2020 census generates an accurate count of how many citizens, non-citizens, and illegal aliens are in the United States of America. Not too much to ask. This will greatly inform a wide array of public policy decisions. This information is also relevant to administering our elections. Some states may want to draw state and local legislative districts based upon the voter-eligible population. Indeed, the same day the Supreme Court handed down the census decision, it also said it would not review certain types of districting decisions, which could encourage states to make such decisions based on voter eligibility. With today's order, we will collect all of the information we need to conduct an accurate census and to make responsible decisions about public policy, voting rights, and representation in Congress. In everything we do, we will faithfully represent the people of the United States of America. I would like now to introduce Attorney General Bill Barr to the podium. Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. President, and congratulations on today's executive order, which will ensure that we finally have an accurate understanding of how many citizens and non-citizens live in our country. As the Supreme Court recognized, it would be perfectly lawful for the federal government to ask on the census whether individuals are citizens of the United States. And it's entirely reasonable to want to know how many citizens and non-citizens there are in the United States. In fact, the federal government has routinely asked questions relating to citizenship ever since the 1820s. But while the Supreme Court correctly recognized that it would be entirely appropriate to include citizenship questions on the census, it nevertheless held that the Commerce Department did not adequately explain its decisions for doing so on the 2020 census. Because, as the Supreme Court recognized, the defect in the Commerce Department's decision was curable with a better record, the President asked me to work with Secretary Ross to determine whether there remained a viable path for including a citizenship question on the census. I did so. In my view, the government has ample justification to inquire about citizenship status on the census and could plainly provide rationales for doing so that would satisfy the Supreme Court. And therefore, there is no question that a new decision to add the question would ultimately survive legal review. The problem is that any new decision would be subject to immediate challenge as a new claim in the 3 ongoing district court cases. In addition, there are injunctions currently in place that forbid adding the question. There is simply no way to litigate these issues and obtain relief from the current injunctions in time to implement any new decision without jeopardizing our ability to carry out the census, which we're not going to do. We're not going to jeopardize our ability to carry out the census. So as a practical matter, the Supreme Court's decision closed all paths to adding the question to the 2020 census. Put simply, the impediment was a logistical impediment, not a legal one. We simply cannot complete the litigation in time to carry out the census. One other point on this. Some in the media have been suggesting, in the hysterical mode of the day, that the administration has been planning to add the citizenship question to the census by executive fiat without regard to contrary court orders or what the Supreme Court might say. This has been based on rank speculation and nothing more. As should be obvious, this has never been under consideration. We have always accepted that any new decision to add a citizenship question to the census would be subject to judicial review. Turning to today, I applaud the President for recognizing in his executive order that including a question on the census is not the only way to obtain this vital information. The course the President has chosen today will bring unprecedented resources to bear on determining how many citizens and non-citizens are in our country, and will yield the best data the government has had on citizenship in many decades. That information will be used for countless purposes, as the President explained in his remarks today. For example, there is a current dispute over whether illegal aliens can be included for apportionment purposes. Depending on the resolution of that dispute, this data may be relevant to those considerations. We will be studying this issue. Congratulations again, Mr. President, on taking this effective action. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.
All right, you just saw President Trump in the Rose Garden declaring victory over something that he actually didn't get. He didn't get the citizenship question on the 2020 census, but spinning it nonetheless. He says he's determined to get that accurate count another way, a way that perhaps could result in a more accurate count. Our legal analyst and chief court correspondent, national correspondent. What are you these days, Terry?
I don't know.
Here, but, an expert on the laws with us, Terry Moran. What's your take on all this? The president here declaring victory, but this isn't a victory.
Yeah, you said he spun this. I'm dizzy from all that spinning because, as you pointed out, the president could have had this from day one. The Census Bureau, the experts on how to count the American people, the constitutional requirement, told the administration, Secretary of State, Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, years ago now. The way to do this is to go through the administrative records collected by Social Security and the IRS and everything, and we will give you a pretty accurate count of how many citizens there are in the United States, and we've got really sophisticated methods for making up the difference. But the administration wanted to force a question on every American. Are you a citizen of the United States? And contrary to what Attorney General Barr says, that direct question has never been asked of every person living in the United States. And then they contrived a reason as to why they needed it. They said, well, we have to enforce the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court didn't say you have an insufficient or inadequate explanation of why you want to put this on the census, as Attorney General Barr and the President just said. The Supreme Court said that's a contrivance. That's a distraction from what you're what you're really trying to do. So they got hammered, and this is the best they can do.
And it's sort of a little bit of egg on the face, Terry, because the Supreme Court, the president was correct, actually said in the opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote, that this would be a perfectly legitimate thing to do. You can ask this question. Of course you can. No problem there. In fact, Wilbur Ross, who oversees the census, used his best judgment. He had reasons for it, but they simply screwed up in effect in how they ruled this out, how they announced it to the public, and the like. A big win for immigrant advocates, if for no other reason than they ran out the clock. The president also right that he could have argued this further, but it would have been mired for months.
And it would have been, because they were too cute by half. This is an own goal by the president. He wanted this question on the census. 5 justices Supreme Court said, including Chief Justice Roberts, you can put this question on the census. Just don't BS this court. Just don't lie to courts about why you want to do it. Tell the truth. Instead, they cooked up this explanation, well, we needed to enforce the Voting Rights Act. The courts rejected that as pretense, as fiction. Every court that looked at it, including the Supreme Court of the United States, says that's not true. He could have done it. Instead, they tried to get too cute about why they really want to do it, so that it'll increase Republican political power. Now, they have a legitimate reason for doing it, to help states who can use it to apportion political power, but they cooked up this reason about the Voting Rights Act that was flat rejected. And yes, this is a victory for the immigrants. It's also a defeat for the president that he inflicted on himself.
Jorge Vasquez joins us now from New York. Jorge, the government actually has a lot of work to do now after this legal fight has sort of clouded the import of the census, how it functions, how it's conducted. A lot of work they have to do now to restore trust in this procedure before it's rolled out in April.
Absolutely, certainly. The government has a large task at hand, and I think for the president and Attorney General Barr to say that an executive order would essentially allow them to continue getting the information they want without going to court, it just seems untrue. It's likely that someone is going to challenge this executive order in court, and I'm sure there'll be new news about the executive order and challenging it and challenging the president's authority. But as was said, the Supreme Court pretty much called the president and his administration out on pretextually stating why they added a citizenship question and said, yes, while the president may be able to add it, the administration might be able to add it, the reason you're giving isn't forthcoming. It's not true. And because it's not true, we need you to come back with the truth.
Terry, remind people who are watching all of this, you know, some people might say, well, isn't it just common sense that we could ask this? We should know how many people are citizens here. Why is the census, though, so important, and this concern about turning people away a legitimate one? What does the census actually give us?
That's a great point. So the Constitution requires an actual enumeration, a head count of all persons, of the whole number of persons. Regardless, children, voters, non-voters, citizens, non-citizens, people who are here with proper authorization, people who are without proper authorization. Everyone living in the United States has got to be counted. That's what the Constitution commands. And the census over the years has asked various questions about how to get at that. In the 20th century, the data science of how to count large numbers of people flowered and came of age, and the experts said, if you ask people directly that question, you're going to get some people scurrying away because they aren't sure of their own status, loved ones, some who may live in the house with them, or they come from countries, and Americans don't understand this, around the world, like covered as a foreign correspondent, many countries where census numbers are manipulated for power and persecution. There hasn't been a census in Lebanon, for example, since 1970, because they can't admit how many Christians and Muslims and
real
Shia
distrust of the central power of the government.
Exactly. So all kinds of people have all kinds of reasons for suspecting the government's intentions when confronted with the question, are you a citizen? And the experts at the Census Bureau decided a better way to do this is to use sampling techniques, to use other data sets that are already there, and we will get a good count of citizens. That was on the table for the president from the get-go, but they like the idea of putting it to the census precisely as some evidence suggests. It would undercount certain people and disempower them in representation in Congress.
So just to underscore for our viewers, the president today announcing that he is stepping back from his fight to put that question on the official short-form census, but they're still going to ask it. They're still going to go at it, as Terry was just saying, from a statistical sampling method on the side, if you will. The Census Bureau will come up with some citizenship data. They will do a count and a calculation, but it will not be part of the official 2020 census. And Jorge Vasquez, before we wrap up, that has such huge implications now for the apportionment of congressional seats, for the electoral votes in states, and for how billions of dollars of funds are distributed, because the hope is that truly everyone that is in this country will now participate and not fear that question.
Absolutely. It's crucial that everyone at home viewing this right now participate fully and engage their neighbors to participate fully in the census. The census is the most critical data that we have and we gather as a country. Is used by the government to distribute $700 billion annually in federal funds. It's also used by the private sector. It touches every aspect of our life. Even cell phone companies use census data to determine how many towers they need, how much service provider the signal strength, things like that. We probably all remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, having dropped calls, and those dropped calls were, in essence, because of faulty data, namely the cell phone companies not knowing how many individuals lived within a certain area. And if we have a true, fair, and accurate count and everyone participates, then we'll have the best data we can have as a country. We can ensure that we have essentially a united front as a country, that our resources are allocated fairly, that our businesses are able to invest properly, and that we're able to determine what's needed here in the United States of America.
Now the focus is on just that. Getting an accurate and complete count starts next April of 2020. Both sides are likely to push towards that. Jorge Vasquez in New York, thank you so much. Terry Moran, Chief National Correspondent. Thanks, Terry. Thanks to all of you for joining us here on ABC News Live. Special coverage of the president's big announcement on the 2020 census. Much more on abcnews.com and on World News Tonight with David Muir coming up shortly. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you next time.